So let's talk about some of the myths around creatine consumption. So the first one I put on the board here, that creatine will make you fat. Well, creatine will cause you to gain weight, especially in the first 7 to 10 days, given that creatine is in such high concentration in our muscle, and muscle is anywhere from 20 to 35 kilos in most individuals. What will happen is water will come in to buffer that increase. So we will retain a little bit of water, and that goes into our cells, and that will increase your weight a little bit. What happens, however, is there's a bit of what's called a diuresis after the 7 to 10 days if you stay on creatine, and that weight will come down. Again, it's water weight, not fat weight. What will happen over a period of time is study after study has shown that if you're a younger person or an older person and you're lifting weights, for example, over 3, 4, or 6 months, which we and others have shown in our studies, eventually you will gain a little bit more weight, and that weight is skeletal muscle. So if you just get on a scale, you say, well, my weight's up, but if you don't do a DEXA scan or something else, you don't realize that it's actually muscle that you gain. So after a period of 4 months, for example, taking creatine, we will see greater increase in muscle mass. So yes, there will be an increase in weight. What's interesting is that if we look at muscle and fat using something called a DEXA scan, what we have found in some of our studies, in the older adults in particular, that females actually lose a little bit of body fat. So this myth, which seems to be more common amongst women than men, if they take creatine, they're going to get fat, is actually not true. And in fact, after a period of time, you gain more muscle, but women actually can lose a little bit of body fat. What's interesting is that Bruce Spiegelman, who's a top researcher, cell biologist out of Harvard, actually has found that the creatine phosphocreatine system does function as a bit of a futile cycle and could actually increase energy expenditure. So it actually may be just the opposite, that creatine may actually help you to lose body weight a little bit. Now, it's not a potent weight loss supplement, but by no means would it cause you to gain body fat. The second thing that I have heard for 15 plus years, even from top MD, PhD researchers in other areas, saying that creatine will damage my kidneys. Now, where that myth came from is that creatine is non-enzymatically converted into creatinine within our muscle cells. And so if someone is on a constant stable diet, getting the same amount of creatine coming in, then what happens is that we will get a constant rate of appearance of the creatinine from our muscle into our blood. That creatinine is then excreted in the urine. So that's called your glomerular filtration rate, the rate at which that creatinine, which is floating in your blood, is excreted in the urine. So what will happen is that if you're stable in your weight, the amount of creatine being produced and going out in the urine will keep your blood creatinine levels fairly stable. So conveniently, if people have something that damages their kidneys and they decrease the rate of disappearance or the filtering of creatinine out into the urine, the plasma creatinine level will go up. And so most doctors are ingrained in their brain to think higher creatinine equals kidney dysfunction, which is a very accurate and very reasonable suggestion if you don't change the rate of appearance of creatinine into the system. So as we mentioned, if you creatine load, you increase your total creatine levels, you're going to increase the rate of appearance of creatinine. So as that comes out into the system, if you hold the glomerular filtration rate constant, i.e. you don't cause any kidney damage, naturally you're pouring more into the pool, but the rate of disappearance stays the same, meaning no kidney damage. Your creatinine will go up a little bit. The problem is that when doctors see that, they think, oh my goodness, it's because your kidneys aren't working. However, studies with the late Doc Portmans and stuff that we've done where we actually measure the creatinine in the blood and when we collect it in the urine to actually measure what's called the glomerular filtration rate, or like Dr. Portmans and others have done using alternate methods of looking at glomerular filtration rate, when we take creatine, there is no signs of any damage, both in the short and in the long run. Now, there have been very well publicized cases, one in the New England Journal of Medicine, another in Lancet, which suggested that an individual on each occasion who took high doses of creatine showed some kidney damage. And that's one-off anecdotes, one in a person who already had mild kidney failure. Of course their creatinine is going to go up because you're putting more into the system. And the second one, the individual was an athlete, and many athletes, myself included, have at one point or another taken ibuprofen. and that individual got interstitial nephritis. But the most common cause of interstitial nephritis is actually taking nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, and nothing was reported as to whether they had taken those anti-inflammatories or other infectious cause. But study after study after study has clearly shown that there is no damage to the kidneys. Early on, there was even some anecdotes about damage to the liver, but again, we have shown long-term studies where we fed creatine to rats and studies in our patients who've taken it up for 20 years. Even with mild renal failure, we don't see kidney issues or liver issues at all. The other issue is that some creatines are better than others. So there's a number of creatine salts on the market, and essentially creatine monohydrate, which is what most of the research study was done, is creatine and a water molecule. But there's a variety of other ones. There's hydrochlorides, there's hydrochloric acid stuck onto the creatine. There's ascorbic acid, which is essentially vitamin C, stuck onto the creatine. So you can have creatine complexed with a whole bunch of other salts. And there's so many myths out there for people trying to make more money from you, saying that one is better than the other. However, as a clinician, as a researcher, and as an individual who's an athlete, I want something that has been well backed by science. And almost every study that's out there, or at least the vast majority in terms of performance, in terms of patients, and all the preclinical work as well, has been done with creatine monohydrate. So saying that one is different than the other is completely illogical, because when you take any one of those, the salt is split. So the free creatine is still the free creatine. And I remember we actually did a study, and I won't say what the molecule was, but a company was trying to get a patent saying that it'll dissolve better if you have this salt versus another. So we did a study, we did muscle biopsies, and showed that there was no difference between creatine monohydrate and this other salt. And their whole theory was that it was going to dissolve better. And they actually filed a patent on it. I don't know if it was ever awarded, but I had it in my office. In a little cup, and you could see that the liquid separated, so the actual creatine was on the bottom and the free salt was in the solution, and it was there for up to 15 years and didn't go into solution. So again, big myth that different creatine salts are different. So there's creatine hydrochloride, the one that most people are selling, and that's what most of the research has done, is creatine monohydrate. So I really would suggest that that's what people take, based on the fact that it is the least expensive versus some of these other ones, and that's where all the research was done. And so in terms of safety and efficacy, this is where we have most of our information on creatine. So those really are some of the biggest myths that I've seen over the years with creatine. There's been some concern about cancer, and there was a big kerfuffle where someone hypothesized that if you took creatine and you mixed it with sugar under very high temperatures, there were compounds that were formed that could have some cancer-forming properties. However, in mouse models where they have solid tumors, for example, they've actually shown that creatine supplementation will lower the risk of cancer. So certainly in the general human population, taken at the usual doses that we've recommended, it's never been associated with cancer. And it's probably one of the most studied supplements. And currently there are tens of millions of people around the world who have taken it for up to 30 years now with no signal coming up. The one adverse event that we and others have seen, which is pretty similar for most supplements, is an upset stomach. And we've even seen young, healthy bodybuilders, and we've seen 90-year-old women with different muscle disease on it. It's about 5% of people will have an upset stomach. Generally, like every supplement, take your creatine with food. It's the way Mother Nature intended us to take the creatine. That will help. And if you're trying to get to a dose, let's say of 3 grams of maintenance or 5 grams a day if you've got muscle disease and you have an upset tummy, take it with food, try and split it in divided doses and cut the dose down. If you're still having stomach upset, maybe this is not the right supplement for you, and try something else. So let's say that after everything that we've talked about, you feel that taking creatine is right for you. As mentioned before, the type of creatine that most people should consider is creatine monohydrate, based on the fact that we know most about the safety of creatine monohydrate. We know most about the efficacy. In fact, almost every study, and indeed every study that I'm aware of in muscle disease patients and aging, has been done with creatine monohydrate. You'll probably also be happy to know that it's generally the least expensive of all of them. For a variety of factors, the price has gone up recently, but as I mentioned, creatine monohydrate, this is synthesized in a biochemical process in what are called GMP facilities, or good manufacturing product facilities. Probably the top company in the world is called Alzchem, and Alzchem in Germany has really done most to promote the use of creatine, the safety of creatine, and good manufacturing facilities. And this brand here, this is what's called Allmax. I can't tell from the bottle here, they don't say that they buy this from Alzchem, but what it looks like, it's probably from Alzchem. But most of the companies would be ultimately buying their stuff from Alzchem. If you can, take a look at the label and see if they are buying their stuff from Alzchem in Germany. Now, there's a variety of different companies. So what happens is they'll usually buy the creatine in bulk, and they'll put it into a container like this. So this is a pretty common container. I'm not sure if it's sold in the United States, but in Canada, this is one of the more popular brands. And it is a pure white powder. So in this little dish here, you can see that's a pure white powder. That's what creatine looks like. If creatine is not pure white, bring it back. If it starts to have a yellow color, then something has gone wrong with it. So the creatine should be white as the driven snow. There should be no discoloration whatsoever. Again, there was some early concerns of certain countries exporting creatine that had some contaminants in it. So unless it's white, pure white, I would definitely not take the creatine. Now, one of the issues, as you can see from this, is that this is a powder. So this powder, if we were to take it and put it into water, does not dissolve. So it's not like sugar that if you put it into water, it'll just be completely colorless and all you'll see is the liquid and the sugar will be dissolved. Creatine is one of the most insoluble compounds that we've certainly come across in the lab. And if you take creatine, you put it into water, it will be a particulate and eventually it'll pool to the bottom. So it'll never go into solution, at least with usual fluids. And just as an example here, you can see the creatine white powder. It's right about here on the bottom, and this is the liquid on top. So clearly showing that even after 10 years, and I tried shaking this up every day for a year, it will not go into solution. Now, things to be aware of. First of all, anything in a liquid is garbage. And the reason why it's garbage is that if you take creatine, you leave it in a liquid for any period of time, it'll get converted into creatinine. And that's been known from studies even in the 50s and 60s that creatine will, sitting in fluid, be converted into creatinine. So that's the first thing to remember. So they might change the pH or whatever, but if you put it into fluid, it's going to end up being converted to creatinine. The other issue too, as you can see here, this is probably only about 10 or 15 teaspoons. So you're gonna have to buy a lot of these sort of things, which is gonna end up costing you a lot more money than buying your pure creatine monohydrate powder. The downside of creatine monohydrate powder is, again, it is a powder and it takes a bit of getting used to for some people. This particular form is micronized, so that means it's ground to a very fine powder, so it doesn't have the gritty taste that some forms of creatine can have. But even this micronized creatine, some people just don't like the taste, which is the popularity of people putting it into these liquid formulas. I would say charlatans putting them into these liquid formulas. So I've blocked out the name of this, but this is healthcare fraud. So this product here is in liquid. So as we've already mentioned, first red flag is liquid is going to be converted into creatinine. So you leave it around for a few days and it's going to be pure creatinine. So you may as well just drink the beef broth that you got and you'll get creatinine from it. So this also claims to have 6 grams of creatine. So this is maximal absorption for serious bodybuilders. And on the side here, it says that 1 dropper has 6 milliliters and that is giving you 6 grams of creatine monohydrate. Let's see what a dropper looks like. There's as full a dropper as I can get out of this. All right. So according to this, if I stick it under my tongue for 20 seconds, no research to support that at all, that somehow it's going to get absorbed more rapidly, and then you swallow it. And it's hard for you to see, but you can probably see a little bit of water jiggling in the bottom. So that's supposed to be 6 grams of creatine. So anyone watching this, let's take this volume here. All right, that's 2.5 grams. So what we're going to do is we're going to double that. Actually, I'm just going to weigh it out here. So let's weigh out 6 grams. All right, there we go. And we're almost there. Oh my goodness, there we go. All right. So this is 6 grams of creatine. All right, that's what 6 grams of creatine looks like. So is there anyone who's looking at this video who thinks that this could contain that? All right, especially when we look at the very poor solubility. Fine, let's stick that in there. We have a pure powder with a little bit of moisture on the bottom. Does anyone think that this could fit into this dropper? And yet this is being sold for, I think it was $30 US for this bottle of water. So think about it. This dropper would have to contain all that creatine. So I've just now mixed up what should be the fluid, and it's pure powder, of course. So again, complete healthcare fraud, total garbage. And this has come and gone, and people keep reinventing this, probably because they're going to grab a bunch of money before they get called out by the FDA. There was another one that had great flavor. I won't say the name, but there was a big lawsuit about it. We actually did some studies where we were actually doing muscle biopsies and people taking this supposed liquid creatine, which of course did absolutely nothing because it can't contain creatine. And you can see just from this demonstration how ludicrous this assumption is. So again, most folks, and there's a variety of brands of creatine monohydrate. We have over the years, and in full disclosure, based on all the research that we've done over many, many years, and my work in mitochondrial disease, started a company. Again, 99% of the research that I've done in the area was before we started a company. But we started a company based on the good, solid science behind creatine and multi-ingredient supplements. And given that years ago we showed that creatine was helpful in muscular dystrophy, what we found is a lot of our patients just didn't like taking the powder. You can see what it looks like. For some people, no big deal, but for others, they just get a taste aversion or they don't like mixing up the powder. So I was at a meeting, and Allschem was there. They were actually partially sponsoring the meeting, and they had this product at our coffee break. So this was a little crunchy tablet. This has a tiny amount of sugar, some dextrose, and it's got creatine monohydrate in it. And that's 1 gram of creatine. And at this meeting, I found myself crunching these down over the coffee break because it's like a candy. So it's very much like a sweet tart, if you remember those from years ago. But that's 1 gram of creatine. Again, eating a sweet tart type thing like that 3 times a day would get you your 3 grams. So that's one formulation. The other thing that we've done, and again, this was Stu Phillips, he was my first postdoc and a great friend and colleague who's arguably the top protein researcher in the world. He and Johnny Parisi, who was my first undergraduate student, got together and they did a study with a multi-ingredient supplement with good quality protein, whey and casein, plus creatine monohydrate, plus vitamin D, plus calcium, as well as fish oil. And essentially what we did is we've put these together, lowered the dose a little bit, but it's called Muscle 5. So this has creatine in it. So 1 scoop of the Muscle 5 product, which you can get at Stay Above Nutrition, has 3 grams of creatine in it. So specifically designed at that 3 gram level based on the work by Eric Haltman and Paul Greenhoff's group, who've shown that that was beneficial. And we've done a randomized double-blind trial in older adults showing the superiority of this over collagen protein, which was our quote-unquote placebo. So that's another way that one can take creatine. And again, full disclosure, I am the CEO and I founded this company. And we're not here to promote the products. We're here to find what works for you. But if it is more convenient, then these are some ways you can consider taking creatine outside of the straight powder. So hopefully we've, through this video, addressed some of your questions, hopefully dispelled some myths about creatine use. If you have any comments or questions regarding this, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section, and subscribe to our video series if you are interested in any more information about sport, performance, health, muscular dystrophy, myopathies, and improving your health span.